الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grants us beneficial knowledge, righteous actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the best of the dunya and the akhirah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us steadfast upon what He is pleased with. This is another session where we look at Kitab al-Ilm by Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. Sorry. I think it's done, yeah. We previously have looked at a definition of al-ilm, virtues of al-ilm, some of the adab, that was last session, some of the adab of the talib al-ilm and how to seek ilm. Then the Shaykh began explaining to us, should I say, some of the things that the student of knowledge should not have when seeking ilm, and what that person should avoid. And we began last week looking at that. So we looked at the Shaykh talking about envy, al-hasad. I think we mentioned this before. Hasad is different to ghibta. Ghibta, the ulama have explained, is that you are, I don't know, in English, I don't know if there's a word for it really, as in that you are envious of a person, of the khair that Allah has given to him, but you want that person to have, you're genuinely pleased for that person, you make dua for that person, right? Jealousy is different. Jealousy, as the ulama, I think we talked about it before as well, is of different levels. Is where you hate for that person to have that ni'mah, or you hate that person because he has that ni'mah. Or the worst one, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and others have said, is the hasad, which is iblisiyya, which is where you hate that thing, you hate the person, and you want it all transferred to yourself. And you want that all power for yourself, or that favor, whatever it is. So the Shaykh has talked about hasad in that way. This is different to ghibta. So you can see your brother who's got more Quran than you, who's got more hadith than you, he might have more, acts of worship. That's actually quite healthy. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. You see your brother with something, you compete with him in that. That's not what the Shaykh is saying. The Shaykh is talking about hasad. And then he gave us, I think, 10 vices and evil consequences to hasad. We don't want to go through all of them again, but that's very beneficial if you were to read it or go over last week's lesson. And again, like we said before as well, without repeating too much, these are just general akhlaq that the Muslim should have anyway, let alone talib al-ilm. So nobody's saying, okay, if you're not talib al-ilm, you can have hasad all you want. The second one, al-ifta' bi-ghayri ilm. Again, this applies to everyone. No one is allowed to speak without ilm. And this is basic, common akhlaq, but also common sense, I feel. And the Shaykh gives us a number of ayat on that. وَلَا تَكْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكُمْ بِعِلْمٍ. Do not speak about that you have no knowledge of. وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَا تَصِفُ أَلْسِنَتُكُمُ الْكَذِبَ هَذَا حَلَالٌ وَهَذَا حَرَامٌ لِتَفْتَرُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ الْكَذِبَ. Do not attribute with your tongues. This has got nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with revelation. Allah is saying this is part of your tongue. أَلْسِنَتُكُمُ الْكَذِبَ, that you have lied with your tongue. هَذَا حَلَالٌ وَهَذَا حَرَامٌ. This is halal, this is haram, this is halal, this is haram. These people are good, those people are bad. This is what you should do, this is my opinion. Therefore, the Shaykh is saying here, the second one is that a person should not be speaking without ilm. And I think we talked about this last week as well. And the Shaykh says that this is a jinayah, meaning this is a crime and this is a felony. Number one, because the person is speaking about Allah and His religion, which he has no authority in. I think it should be like this. Right? And when he's saying that, he's attributing the haqq to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from his own opinion. Another reason why this is wrong is that it will then lead to people thinking something is part of the religion when it's not. And the Shaykh gives an example of the ruling. So he might think, okay, something is wajib when it's not wajib, or something is haram when it's not haram, or something is haram when it is. You get the idea. They'll change the rulings. Another consequence of this is that it will then affect people and their stations. So if everybody starts speaking about the religion, which they have no knowledge of, the people who actually have knowledge will not be known. Hence, then he gives us a number of benefits. But again, I'm trying to summarize it because of time, and obviously I think we need to finish it by the end of this month, I think Ustadh Ariff said. But he gives us this narration from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anh, and I think this kind of summarizes this point, which is where he says, أيها الناس, O people, من سأل عن علم يعلمه فليقل به. If you have been asked about ilm, then say it. ومن لم يكن عنده علم فليقل الله أعلم. And if you've been asked about something that you have no knowledge of, then say الله أعلم. فإن من العلم أن يقول لما لا يعلم الله أعلم. Because it's from ilm for you to say Allah knows best when you don't know. That's you actually showing your ilm. That's you actually showing your wisdom. And I think some of the ulama, and perhaps we might go through this at some point, bi'idhnillah. Imam Sa'di rahimahullah has a book which is similar on the adab al-talab al-ilm. And in that, or in its explanation, some of the ulama have said that when you say Allahu A'lam, there are a number of benefits. Number one, you attribute the haqq to the haqq. Right? So the kitab speaks for itself. The sunnah speaks for itself. So when you say that, you're only saying what the haqq already has been conveyed to us. When you speak within your limits, it is showing sincerity. Because anybody can just make up an answer and feed somebody else, and that person thinks he's been fed. But you know yourself that you're not being sincere. You haven't studied it, you don't know about it. I think that's sufficient now. I mean, there are a number of other things that we could talk about in speaking without ilm, and I think the Shaykh has said that. So now that's the second characteristic that he brings after hasad. The talib al-ilm, the person who's seeking ilm, should not be getting involved or speaking about things that he has no knowledge of. That doesn't mean that he didn't inquire about them, but he should know his limits and stop where he needs to stop. Number 3, the talib al-ilm must avoid al-kibr. And al-kibr is pride and arrogance. How do we define what is pride and arrogance? The Messenger of Allah ﷺ gave us the definition for it. He said, al-kibr, batrul haqq, ghamtul nas, is when the person rejects the truth and he thinks he's better than the people. Now some of the ulama, I don't want to, let me see what the Shaykh has said. The Shaykh has just explained what I've explained in Arabic in the way that I've just done in English, where the person rejects the truth after it comes to him and he sees himself superior to the people. That's kibr. But now in this hadith, the Messenger of Allah, this is in Sahih Muslim, Kitab al-Iman, he says, sallallahu al-kibr batrul haqq wa ghamtun nas. This wow here, does that mean that there are two separate characteristics? Or does it mean that the person who's got kibr has both of these characteristics? You get what I'm saying? So now here, al-kibr batrul haqq, kibr is to reject the haqq, as well as, according to one interpretation, that he sees himself better than others. Because he is sufficed with what he feels he knows. And he rejects everything else because he thinks he's better than everyone. But the second interpretation is al-kibr batrul haqq is either one of these two. Rejecting the truth, or you thinking yourself better than other people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. All of this is correct. All of this is included in kibr. So the Shaykh is saying here now, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you tawfiq to seek ilm, sit in halaqat, learn some Arabic, memorize some Quran, do some things that, other people that probably might be a little bit envious of. Because let's face it, I don't think that there's anyone who says La ilaha illallah sincerely except that person wants to excel in ilm. He wants to be practicing. For one reason or another, they're not. But when they look at a practicing person, they say, MashaAllah, I wish I was like that. So now, when you are like that, the person who is practicing, iyak wa iyak, do not become the person who is arrogant over the people. And this is what the Shaykh is saying here. Because that will destroy all of your hard work. It will destroy all of your ibadah, and it will destroy the barakah of your ilm, even if the ilm remains. This is very important. It is possible that there are people who have ilm, but they have kibr at the same time. So a person will say, how is it possible that he's got kibr? How is Allah going to give ilm to a person who's got that kibr? It is possible. Because the Messenger of Allah, he said, Quran hujjatun laka wa alayk, as we studied the other day. And the Quran is either a proof for you or against you. You could know the Quran and it's still being a proof against you. So don't think, okay, Allah's giving me ilm, Allah's giving me good deeds, etc., that I'm free from this. Nobody's free from it. Nobody's free from it. Number 4, now this is very beneficial. التعصب للمذاهب والآراء. Stay away from partisanship, sectarianism, splitting into groups and becoming divided, becoming a hizb and having hizbiyah, based on either, the Shaykh is saying here, للمذاهب, or the ara. The ara meaning the opinions. Which opinion do you follow? I follow that opinion. Why? Because that's my people. That's my group. The Shaykh is saying here, don't do that. فَيَجِبْ عَلَى طَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ أَن يَتَخَلَّى عَنْ. It is wajib for the student of knowledge to be free from الطائفية والحزبية, groups, sectarianism. بحيث, and what is this now? The Shaykh is saying, what is this hizbiyya? What is, how do we define, how do you recognize it? بحيث يعقد الولاء والبراء على طائفة معينة أو على حزب معين. That my love and my hatred, my duty and my rejection is based on either the group or a particular group. فهذا لا شك خلاف منهج السلف. There is no doubt that this contradicts the methodology of the Salaf, because the Salaf as-Salih ليسوا أحزابا. They are not separate groups. Salaf as-Salih, the manhaj of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is one. And he uses the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says as dalil, هو سماكم المسلمين من قبل. Allah has called you Muslim, meaning you are one religion. And you are not split into groups and sects. And then the Shaykh gives us a number of things for you to recognize hizbiyah. Number 1, that these people contradict the kitab and the sunnah at the expense of a shaykh or a group. Now this is very important, because sometimes you can see it clear as day that they are only following a madhab or an opinion because of a school or a university or a masjid or wherever it might be. That's clear as day, right? But when it becomes difficult is when you've got a group who might call themselves Salafi, but their allegiance is not to the Kitab and the Sunnah. Now that's a very bold statement. And the reason why is because they will claim Kitab and Sunnah themselves, they might even bring ayat and hadith. However, this is very important, because these people, wallahi, a lot of them, they don't understand how ijtihad works. And where there are areas of ijtihad where there are areas are not of ijtihad. These people, they might have the Kitab and Sunnah, or they might quote the Kitab and Sunnah, but do they have the correct understanding of it? So you can easily use the Kitab and Sunnah to support your argument. And Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he's praying the wrong way. Sorry, I'm just saying he's praying the wrong way. Unless the Qibla's changed. Are you sure? Alright. So now here, what was I saying? Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, a sign of hizbiyah and a sign of tahazzub is when the people, now this is very important, will have a view and then they'll seek the dalil. They have a view, then they seek the dalil. So this person, he's not Salafi. How do we know he's not Salafi? I don't know, he's just not clear. Let's dig a little. He went there, he shared the platform, he did this, he did that, now there's our dalil. They have a view, and then they will apply all of that then, sit with Ahlul Bid'ah, etc. And all these different ayat they will then bring, and they'll say, look, apply it to this person. So that's why it's very important. The Shaykh is saying here, because we are not a religion of taqleed. We are not a religion of blindly following, right? The Shaykh is saying here, follow the Kitab and Sunnah according to the correct understanding that it has. And when you have that, you won't have partisanship. First thing. Second thing the Shaykh says, وَيَسْتَدِلْ عَلَيْهِ بِالْأَدِلَّةِ الَّتِي قَدْ تَكُونَ دَلِيلًا عَلَيْهِ. He will bring evidences, the person who has got this hizbiyah, he will bring evidences to support his hizbiyah, but quite often the evidences that he brings is actually a proof against himself. And there are so many examples of which I don't want to get into right now, and it's very controversial, as you can imagine, but I'm just quoting what the Shaykh is saying, really. I'm not saying anything for myself. And then look at this, subhanAllah. They will then come out with false principles. Third way that you can now tell a hizbi. Such as, look at what he says, 30 years ago. من ليس معي فهو علي. وهذا مبدأ خبيث the Shaykh calls it. If you're not with me, then you must be a hizbi. If you're not with me, then you must be a hizbi. And the Shaykh says this is a false, false. This is an evil and disgusting and impure principle. And then the Shaykh says, as a result of all that, صار بعضهم يضلل بعضا ويأكل لحم أخيه ميتا. And then you will find them making ghibah of one another. And again, going back to some of the things that we've said before, kibr and hasad, etc. And the Shaykh says, in reality, what this is causing is a weakness to the ummah. وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. About this issue, do not differ so that your strength will leave you. This is the ayah. About this issue, I asked our Sheikh Sa'd al-Shitri. He's been to the UK a number of times. He's one of the kibar ulama. And I personally think that he probably will be the next mufti of Saudi Arabia. Allah knows best. Anyway, he's a person of caliber. There's no doubt about it. I asked him, oh Sheikh, you've been to Birmingham, you stayed in Birmingham for a while. What do you think is the issue between the Salafis there? And what is your advice? You know what he said to me? He said, Wallahi, there's no difference. He said, there's no difference between this masjid and that masjid. Now that, a person will look at it and say, nah, it's just preposterous. Of course there's a difference between this masjid and that masjid. And then he explained, he said, they've got the same manhaj, they've got the same dalil, they've got the same ulama, but they're fighting amongst one another over things which are not even things that, obviously there are going to be issues, of course. But does that lead, like the Shaykh Uthaymeen is saying here, for you now to say that this person is a mubtadi' over that person being a mubtadi'? Quite often it's because of his I don't want to call it that, this is for the ulama, but this is quite often because of this group and that group. That's basically what it is. To the point the Shaykh says, لذلك, 30 years ago he said, نجد بعد طلاب العلم يكون عند الشيخ من المشايخ. You will find some of the students, they have one sheikh from the mashayikh. It's very important. I think I had this discussion with you guys before. This brother, he comes and he says, Sheikh Fulan, we didn't need to mention his name, I think it's well known to all of us. He says, this sheikh, you need to go back to him. I go, Akhi, a lot of the things that I've taken from is from Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, Sheikh Salih al-Hidan. Is that a problem? No, they're mashayikh. But you need to go back to this one. Literally, I could be talking to a wall here, man. What are you saying to me, that there's only one sheikh and you recognize other mashayikh? Or there is only one sheikh and you don't recognize other mashayikh? Look what the sheikh is saying here. No problem. Shaykhun min mashayikh. You have some tulab al-ilm, you'll have one sheikh. Look what he says now. ينتصر لهذا الشيخ بالحق والباطل. All of the haqq and all of the batil is based on the sheikh. All of the haqq and all of the batil is based on the sheikh. وَيُعَادِي مَنْ سِوَاهُ. Anyone who is against this sheikh, he is my enemy. وَيُدَلِّلُهُ وَيُبَدِّئُهُ. And anyone who is against it, he's misguided. Anyone who is against him is a mubtadi'. وَيَرَى شَيْخُهُ هُوَ الْعَالِمُ الْمُصْلِحِ. This sheikh is the alim who is the one who is the muslih. خلاص, there's no one else. وَمَنْ سِوَى إِمَّا جَاهِل أو مُفْسِد. Anyone other than the sheikh, either he's jahil, he's not on the same level, or completely don't take it from him, or he's not really a sheikh, we need to warn against him. وَهَذَا, this is Uthaymeen. I don't want anyone to say, look, Ustadh Ariff said this and that, look, he's going to... I'm just reading from the book. هَذَا غَلَطٌ كَبِيرٌ. This is a huge error. But yajib, and the sheikh goes on, what is wajib is for us to go back to the kitab and the sunnah with the understanding of the ulama who has the most ilm on that issue, And that is where you go. That is where your allegiance is to. And it might be with one sheikh, it might be with another sheikh. And I remember Sheikh Muhammad Amin al-Shinqiti, he said something which is beautiful. Actually, to be honest, I think it's from the Salaf before Imam Shafi and others. He said, if a person was to believe that there is only one sheikh, and he's talking about partisanship in general, whether you talk about sheikh today or you talk about Abu Hanifa or Malik or anyone else before, whoever says that this is my madhab and he is my sheikh, then what he is saying is that all of the religion is existing in this man and his opinions, which is absolutely incorrect. We know that categorically. And if a person actually believes that, it goes to the level of kufr. Because that is only, that characteristic and that description can be only given to one human being, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Next thing the Shaykh says, التصدر قبل التأهل. Now, normally when we start the lesson, I set out the aims for what we're going to do. So let me do that now. We're going to complete this section where we're talking about some of the things that the Shaykh is saying here that the Talib al-Ilm needs to avoid. The next bit then is Kutub Talib al-Ilm, some of the books that the student of knowledge needs. Now this is very important because a lot of people ask this question and I've never actually recorded or published an answer. So this works well for us. In where the Shaykh basically says there are different books that you need to have and there are different syllabuses that you need to work towards. Because a lot of people say, well, I want to start seeking ilm. Where do I start? Do I start off in Kitab al-Tawheed? Do I start off Sahih Bukhari? Or do I start off Qawaid Arba' and then Qawaid Arba' and then Qawaid Arba'? You'll find a lot of people doing that. And Allah knows best why they do that. Sometimes people are paranoid. Sometimes people, they do it and then they fall off and they want to go back again. And sometimes people are being told that's your level. Allah musta'an, there are people who are being told that. And we don't want to go back to certain people, but that's what they've been told. This is your level. Qawaid Arba' Usul al-Thalatha. Akhi, don't ask anything else otherwise. This is a huge mistake. Akhi. So the Shaykh gives us a list for us to follow. And then there are a number of pages where the way that the book has been formatted is question and answers from the Shaykh regarding student of knowledge and seeking of ilm. We're going to start looking at that, inshallah. Some of the questions we'll skip because they've already been kind of like answered within the book itself. But there are a lot of very beneficial questions, and that's what we'll be looking at, inshallah, today. And I think next session, the session after that. And then the book basically then ends with a number of rasail. Now these rasail, these small treaties, so now there are treaties within the book itself. There are a number of smaller books within the book itself. And some of these books are very beneficial to the point that they've been published by themselves, even in the English language. So I remember, what is it? What's it called? If you want, you can message me. I can send it to you. But I can't remember the exact title or how they've phrased it in English. But I think it's something to do with the study guide of the student of knowledge by Uthaymeen. And then Sheikh Abdul Razak al-Badr gave an explanation. 60 pages in English, something like that. And it's been translated. It's very beneficial. So those kind of small rasail, akhlaq, noble manners, I don't know if you've seen that before in Uthaymeen. That's available also in English, PDF, available in the market as well. And there are a number of books, what to do when the scholars have differed. I believe that's been translated as well. And some of these books actually we've actually covered in previous sessions at Masjid Tayba. But what we'll do is we'll go through these rasail, and then inshallah that will bring us to the end of the book and then also the end of the semester. So now going back to this, the Shaykh is saying here, number 5, what the student of knowledge must refrain from, التصدر قبل التأهل. Before he is qualified and accomplished in something, he should not engage in teaching or talking about that affair. Basically, as Sheikh Salih was saying, he says, know your thobe size. Don't wear a thobe that's too small, and don't wear one that's too big. Know your thobe size. Yeah. That's the one. Yeah, what's it called? Daily routine student. Very beneficial. That's part of this. So again, like I said, if you were to go back to that, and you got a shara of it as well, it's just nur upon nur. Obviously, we won't be able to go through all of that in our sessions here. التصدر قبل التأهل. The Shaykh is saying here, do not start speaking before you are on a level to do so. If a person starts doing that, I mean, this is similar to what the Shaykh has said before, that don't speak without ilm, but this is a little bit different. And the reason why is because now what he's doing is he's attributing views to himself. He's attributing views to himself, an explanation to himself. I'm a person who studied in Medina, or I'm a person who studied here or there, right? I'm now in a position to come and sit and start teaching, etc. So now he is calling people to his da'wah. That's why this is a little bit different to the previous one. The previous one, if that was him speaking or issuing verdicts without knowledge, that's just completely wrong. But this one is a little bit different because now this person is giving da'wah and calling to itself. And the Shaykh has said that there's 4 things wrong with that. Number 1, i'jabuhu bi nafsi. It brings about self-amazement. And wallah, this happens a lot. I mean, perhaps in this country as well, but I've seen it from people in other countries where they start speaking and people put them on that pedestal. I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything which is unknown. People put them on that pedestal, and then what happens is that they then start speaking about affairs that they shouldn't be speaking about, and then it's just problematic. What was the root cause? The root cause was that he started engaging in things beyond his thought size. Number 2, this also shows a lack of fiqh and ma'rifah on his part, and hikmah on his part. Okay, so now you've studied a few books. If you wanted to go and reteach those books to people, that's fine, all right? There's nobody's going to say that you shouldn't do that if you've got permission to do so. But now, when you start engaging in things before you are qualified in it, people will see that this person is actually now approaching this mas'ala without fiqh and ma'rifah and hikmah. But you can tell that the person is a person of ilm when you discuss an issue with him, or you go to the shaykh and you ask him a question. Wallah, akhi, sometimes you are amazed by the answer that the shaykh gives you. Why? Because he's a person of fiqh, ma'rifah and hikmah. And sometimes when you are, I mean, we've done this all ourselves, right? A person asks you a question, or you want to, give advice to somebody in your family, and you're hasty and you're really, eager for them to benefit. So you'll just say anything. You might end up saying things that you end up regretting. This is what the Shaykh is saying here. Number 3, it then leads to the previous thing that we talked about, which is speaking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in which you have no knowledge. And number 4, when the person is speaking before he is qualified, before he is in a position to do so, the Shaykh says here, fil ghalib, not always, but most of the time, that person has already put himself on that station. So if somebody comes to advise him, he's not going to accept it, because he's already put himself on that station. Now this is very important. This goes back to the second point, which is this is now a sign of the lack of fiqh and hikmah in that person. Wallahi, I've sat with some mashayikh who are thrice my age. Thrice, maybe not so. Maybe when I was then. And you speak to the shaykh and you say, yeah, but what about this? What about that? You will see that the shaykh lowers himself to the haqq, not lowering himself to the person who's saying the haqq. I'll give you an example, yeah? We used to go to Sheikh Saleh Sadlan's house, may Allah have mercy on him, an amazing human being, may Allah have mercy on him, one of the major scholars of our ummah. After Salat al-Jum'ah, we used to go to his house, drink kahwa, etc. I remember this, it's just come to my mind, this particular incident, because this reminds me exactly of this here. So this person, he comes and he speaks to the Sheikh. I'm sitting literally, I'm here, the Sheikh's next to me there. And this person, he comes and asks the Sheikh a question. And he says, Sheikh, there's a person that wants to translate. I don't know what language, but the question is about translating, yeah? So he goes, should he translate, what he's asking for that person to translate? Religious text. The Sheikh said, yeah, let him translate it as long as he's an alim in both of those languages, meaning he's proficient in Arabic or whatever language, L1, L2. He's proficient in both of them. So I said to the Sheikh, what about his knowledge of the Sharia? Is that something which is important as well? And then he took my hand here, so he's sitting there, he took my hand and he goes, this is very important. It's good that you mentioned that. Then he said to the person that was there, because he moved back a little bit, because it's like a majlis, and he says, call him as well. And he has to be a person who knows about the Sharia. Now this is very important, because now here, we've got ChatGPT, we've got artificial intelligence, all these different things. You ask it something, it then relays it back. You think that, okay, this has gathered all this information, it must be. How are you then going to filter? The only way is through knowledge of the Sharia. So now here the Shaykh is saying here that you can tell that the person is a person in the authority to give that ilm with these four characteristics, or the lack of these four characteristics. Or if we don't do it, these four characteristics will be present. And the last one there, he is saying here that quite often the person who's been put on that pedestal, whether by himself or the people, is very likely that he won't accept the haqq, because he's on that level. But the people who are engaged in finding the haqq, and their focus is on learning and teaching, etc., then they will accept the haqq when it comes to them. So that's the fifth point. The sixth point, the Shaykh says here, do not have bad thoughts of others. فَيَجِبْ عَلَى طَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ حَذْرٌ أَنْ يَظُنَّ بِغَيْرِهِ ظَنًّا سَيِّئًا. And then the Shaykh goes on. It is not permissible for the talib al-ilm, for him to have bad thoughts of other people. Now here the Shaykh is talking about bad thoughts of other people, but there's two things that I want to mention here. Bad thoughts of other people, but also bad thoughts of the act of worship that he's engaging in when it comes to the seeking of ilm. Because quite often a lot of people, they will seek ilm and think, oh, this is not going anywhere, what's the point? And sometimes you have to recheck your intention and the reason why you're doing things, because sometimes you could go and try and benefit someone and nobody listens. The Shaykh says here, having bad thoughts. Now again, this is just general akhlaq. The Shaykh says having bad thoughts in general is from the signs and the characteristics of the munafiqun. الَّذِينَ يَلْمِزُونَ الْمُطَّوِّئِينَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. These ayat were revealed about the munafiqun during the battle of Tabuk and also Hunayn, Surah Tawbah. And within this context, what they did is, the battle of Tabuk, the Messenger of Rasulullah is traveling from Medina all the way to Tabuk. Tabuk is right next to Israel today, if you want to call it Israel. Right. Point here, it's in Sham. It's not Hijaz. It's a whole different region. You have to travel across the desert. It's summer and there's been a drought. So people, not only do they have a lot of finances themselves, but they don't have actual food and water, etc., because there's been a drought. So now he's traveling across the desert. Uthman bin Affan comes forward and he says, I'll pay for the Jaysh al-Ushra. He pays for it all. And now here, some of the mu'minun, what they did is they're coming forward with whatever they've got. £5, £10, £20, whatever. So the munafiqun, they started belittling that. All you got is £5. Is that all you're going to give? £10 is all you're going to give? What's that going to do? الَّذِينَ يَلْمِزُونَ الْمُطَّوِّئِينَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. They started now rebuking and belittling, etc. وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَجِدُونَ إِلَّا جُهْدَهُم. And some of these people who are going to travel in this expedition, they've got nothing except for what? Their bodies, that's all they've got. إِلَّا جُهْدَهُم. فَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنْهُم. The munafiqun are mocking them. سَخِرَ اللَّهُ مِنْهُم. Allah then mocks them back. وَاللَّهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And they will have a painful punishment. So the Shaykh is saying here, فَإِنَّ الْوَاجِبِ إِحْسَانُ الظَّنِّ بِمَنْ ظَاهَرَهُ. Now this is very important, look what he says. فَإِنَّ الْوَاجِبِ إِحْسَانُ الظَّنِّ بِمَنْ ظَاهَرَهُ الْعَدَالَةِ. Look what he says here. When you can see that a person is upright, he's practicing his religion, he's Salafi, Kitab, Sunnah, Salaf al-Salih, his Mashayikh, Bin Baz, Uthaymeen, Albani, etc., etc., etc. He comes to the masjid, he's doing good deeds, but then what did they say? Nah, it's not clear what his manhaj is. He's obscure. We don't know anything about him. The Shaykh is saying this is wrong. This is wrong. Su' al-dhan is not allowed in this way. And I'm not saying that these people are munafiqun, but the Shaykh is saying here, this is a characteristic of munafiqun. That when you've got somebody who's zahiruhu al-adala, there's nothing wrong with this guy. He's fulfilling his wajibat. There's nothing from major sins in this person. In actual fact, you can see only khair in him. You look at him, you see khair. then it is wajib for you to have good thoughts of that person. أما من ظهره غير العدالة, but if you've got something which goes against the adala, now the ulama have talked about what is this adala. Adala is when the person has either forfeited on something which is wajib, or he has fallen into something which is of a major sin. Openly. If he's got major sins in his home, that doesn't affect the adala. And there is more tafsil and more detail in that, but I'm just giving you a broad. No major sins. Can you see any major sins on him? No, he doesn't drink, he doesn't do riba, he doesn't do riba. He's a nice guy. Is he fulfilling all of his wajibat? Yes. But if there is something which contradicts the adala, now that person is known to have some views which are incorrect, or he listens to people who are not correct, etc. فَلَا حَرَجْ أَن يَكُونْ فِي نَفْسِكَ سُوءَ الظَّنِّ بِهِ. Then there is no harm in you having some kind of suspicion of that person. But look what he says now here. No, nobody can take from this and say, yeah, this is what we're doing. He's not clear. لكن مع ذلك, but with that, عليك أن تتحقق حتى يزول ما في نفسك من هذا الوهم. You don't live in that state. You don't live in that state. You are the person who's got the suspicion. Can you carry on living in that state while you've got that thing in your heart against your Muslim brother? If you do, then that's a disease in yourself, akhi. This is what the Shaykh is saying, not me. He's saying here, you can't carry on in that state. You have to then remove that suspicion and go speak to the brother. He might be listening to someone, or might be going to a masjid, or having something where he doesn't know. Or he might have a ta'wil which is not correct, or something that they will fail to compute, that he has an ijtihad which is different to yours. How can you have an ijtihad which is different to mine? You see what I'm trying to say here? So now the Shaykh is saying here, لأن بعض الناس قد يسيء الظن بشخص ما بنى على وهم الكاذب. Sometimes people have suspicion upon another person because it is based upon something which is a lie. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, I just want to mention this benefit. We'll move on from this afterwards because I think the Shaykh has got a couple of other things. We'll mention that as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Shaykh is using this ayah as well. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اجْتَنِبُوا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الظَّنِّ إِنَّ بَعْدَ الظَّنِّ إِثْمٌ. Believers avoid having suspicion about other people. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, ghiba, namima, fighting, insulting, splitting off, accusing one another, all of these different things which cause disunity and hatred starts off from where? Su'adhan. That's where it starts off from. And then it escalates. Nobody's going to just insult someone all of a sudden, or say, I'm not going to speak to this person anymore, or he's a mubtadi', or whatever, or cut off family ties, just like that. It doesn't work like that. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, there is su'adhan. That su'adhan settles, and it brews, and it manifests until it becomes something bigger, until this person's nafs or his hawa, or whatever it might be, then lashes out with his tongue. This guy, you know what, I just don't like this guy, man. Every time he's doing this, every time he's like this, every time. Where does that come from? The su'adhan. What should he have done? The Shaykh is saying here, go back to him. Sort the problem out. Remove it. Purify yourself. The problem is now with you, as well as maybe him, or just you and nothing to do with him. Allah musta'an. So the Shaykh is saying here, with this, the su'adhan and the husnul-dhan, this ayah then tells us that you have to, now we said this before, you have to go back to the daleel. No. You have to go back to the Shaykh. Is that right? You go back to the Shaykh, and the Shaykh will tell you right or wrong. And we are going to make right and wrong based on the Shaykh. Of course not. The Shaykh is saying here, this ayah is actually proof to say that if you've got suspicion about a person, then you go back to the daleel. Speak to the brother. Establish the proof. Maybe you're the one that's wrong. Then the Shaykh also says, with this point as well, su'adhan, husnul-dhan, when the person has husnul-dhan and he removes the su'adhan, also it then creates respect and dhul and humility and khushu' in himself, because then what that person will do is they have that clean heart. And then, as a consequence, this is so beautiful from the Shaykh, Allah have mercy on him. What this will then do is that this person will know what is appropriate for his level. Why? It all comes from the su' al-dhan and the husn al-dhan. If the person has husn al-dhan, he will know what his level is because he's sincere. He's a good person. He's clean inside. But when the person has su' al-dhan, he puts himself... You've seen this probably yourself. People speaking about matters that they're not qualified. Why? Where does it come from? Because of su' al-dhan. في كتب طالب العلم. What are some of the books for the طالب العلم? Now the Shaykh says here, before we start talking about the books, the Shaykh says that it's very important that when you buy books, there are two things that you need to take into consideration when buying books. Number one, the topic, and number two, the terminologies. Number one, the topic, and number two, the terminologies. So I've got this book here, and it's a translation of Jalaluddin Suyuti's book, The Authority of the Sunnah. Right. Here, when you buy this book, when you read this book, when you study this book, the Shaykh is saying here, before you buy a book, you need to understand the topic of the book and whether it's relevant for you and whether you should be studying this book. But then also, when you now are in a position to study the book, and we're going to look at whether you should be self-reading or not, that's going to come as a question later on, or what's the best way of going about studying, etc. And the Shaykh says categorically, you shouldn't be reading. You shouldn't be reading by yourself. Unless if you're on a level, to be on that level to be reading by yourself. But that's going to come later on. But then when you've got a book like this, and you're studying with the Shaykh, then the second thing, not only are we now trying to understand the topic, but also the terminologies. And the Shaykh gives examples. What's muttafaqun alayh? What's agreed upon? Something could be agreed upon, might be Bukhari and Muslim when you're studying hadith, but it might be agreed upon which is something else somewhere else. In the books of the Hanabila, agreed upon is what Imam Ahmad narrated as well as Bukhari and Muslim. So this is an example of terminologies. Also terminologies and order of dalil. The Shaykh gives example of following the kitab, sunnah, ijma', qiyas, etc. The third thing that the Shaykh says here is that when you are studying these books, it's very important, now going back to the terminologies, it's very important that you understand these terminologies and take your time with them. Make sure you understand them well. Then the Shaykh says, very important that when you've got these books and you're studying with these books, that you make notes in what you study from these books. How do you make notes? Either you make notes, the Shaykh is saying here, bil hawamish wal hawashi, meaning in the margins and on the sides. That's one way of doing it. Or what some people do, and this is what I think is more preferable in my opinion, is you have a separate notebook for that topic. Okay, so now here the Shaykh's going to give us a list, yeah? And that'll probably become clearer, but I'm studying Aqeedah, for example. What book are you studying Aqeedah? Qawaid al-Arba'. What's your next book? Usul al-Thalath. What's your next book? Kashf al-Shubahat. What's your next book? The list will go on. So now I've got a notepad or notebook in Aqeedah. All of my notes and my benefits are going to go in this one here. I think personally for me, I've benefited from that more than this. Now here, for example, you've got Qawaid al-Arba'. I say this is Qawaid al-Arba'. I've made my notes. I put that on my side, now that's in my shelf, yeah? Then I study Usul al-Thalatha, and I put my notes in there. I want to recall a benefit. Which book was it in? I know it was an Aqeedah book, but I can't remember which book it was. There's one benefit that I want to extract, but I don't know which one this is. If you've got it in a notebook, or a notepad, or a file, which is an Aqeedah file, you'll be able to find it. Especially if it's digital. All you need is Control F, and that's it. So I'm saying, this is what the Shaykh is saying, make sure you make notes, but if you've got, so there's two ways of doing that. Either you do it in the book itself, or you have a separate file. If you've got a separate file, wallah, I think it's so much easier, and it will be more beneficial for you in the long run. So now here, for example, say I want to write a khutbah, on a particular topic, I'll just go to the file that I've got. And it's very easy for you to now draw up a khutbah or a lecture or a lesson or a kalima and then put it in the order that you want it. If you want to do it the other way, quite often it'll take you hours to go through the books that you've got. You might end up even just going back to Google and searching stuff and going to different websites. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, because you still research, still talab al-ilm, but this is probably more organized and easier and probably even more precise. The other thing that the Shaykh says, that when you are, because now he's talking about having a library and having a book list, etc. So he's giving advice on what you should be doing with books. So the other thing that the Shaykh is saying here is that you should learn how to read. Bit of a strange one, that. Learn how to read. The Shaykh says here there are two types of reading. مطالعة تدبر والتفهم, reading to understand a topic. So I'll be reading this book and it'll take me maybe a couple of minutes, maybe even longer, to read this page to make sure I fully understand it, memorize its evidences, etc., and then move on. And what I'm doing at the same time, or maybe later on, is pondering on what I've learnt. So that's one type of reading. And the second one is for the purpose of reference only. And we can even have a third one. Wallahi, I've seen some mashayikh, wallahi, they read like this. Literally, it's like just skim reading, literally. They might read a book in like a couple of, half an hour or so. I've seen literally like that. And then they'll be able to tell you what's in it. Now, obviously that comes after time. I'm not saying that we're on that level and that's what I'm supporting. But we do this in university and our studies as well. Like, they teach us that you should like have a level of skinning and scamming when it comes to reading. So I would add that third one as well. But that only comes afterwards. But the Shaykh is saying here, when it comes to actual reading for the purpose of understanding, and the second one is reading for the purpose of referencing. Meaning you are going back to a particular mas'ala, so you can look at the evidences on that mas'ala. You are not trying to understand the whole book, you're just trying to understand that thing that book is talking about. Yeah, Ash.
So that's skimming just to get a rough idea? Or is it just...
Skimming and scanning will come at a point where you are probably more likely going to use that to revise rather than to understand. Because skimming and scanning for the purpose of understanding is very dangerous. Very dangerous. You could miss out some key information and then misunderstand it completely. And with this, you will then see that many of the Salaf, especially when it comes to times and places of Fada'il, that they used to say, for example, when we used to enter into Makkah, we didn't finish it until we finished at least one khatmah. And when Ramadan comes, you know, Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, used to do a khatmah in the morning, khatmah in the evening. 60 khatmah every Ramadan. How is that possible? As in, like, you're reading the Quran really fast. How long is it taking for you to do a juz? Maybe like 8 minutes, 10 minutes to do a juz. And you're reading that fast. Where's the tafsir? This is because they're on level number 3 now. That they're reading this ayah, they've read it how many times? They know it at the back of their hand. They know the tafsir at the back of their hand. So they're reading it, they're not missing anything out, but the tafsir now in their brain is skimming and scanning. You know what I'm saying? Number 3, the Shaykh is saying here, collecting books. Now this is very important, and I think a lot of homes don't actually have it. Akhi, if you don't have books in your home, what are you going to have? If the malaika don't come, what's going to be there except the shayateen? Added to the fact that books and ilm is sadaqah jariyah. Some of the ulama said ilm yuntafa bih refers to him leaving back ilm, and others have said it refers to him investing in ilm so that people will benefit. So I spend like £2,000 on making a library here. That's part of the sadaqah jariyah. Others have said no, the sadaqah jariyah of the ilm is the ilm that he left behind, but fadlullah wasi'. So here, there are a number of benefits, and I think it's very important, especially in a time of fitna, that you need to stack up on ilm. This is your iman, and this is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And tomorrow, the fitna is going to get worse. And right now, we're in a time of ease. Who knows tomorrow that they will say no more Islamic books? No more Salafi books. Who knows? They did it in Muslim countries. They banned Ibn Taymiyyah, etc. for decades. You can't get it. Therefore, benefit and take benefit from ease before difficulty. So the Shaykh is saying here, build some books for yourself. I'm not saying build a library, but at least have something. And with the list that he gives us here, I think most of these are in English. I think everyone should obtain these books. The Shaykh says here, begin. So now obviously you're not going to buy the library in one go. So the Shaykh is saying here, in level of importance, start with those things which are more important. What are the books which are more important? The Shaykh says from the books of the Salaf. And I mean, Suyuti is not from the Salaf, but you will find many books like these that have been translated from the time of the Salaf. Aqeedah Ashab al-Hadith by Sabuni, Sharh al-Sunnah al-Barbahari, Usul al-Sunnah Imam Ahmad. The Shaykh will give us a list. There's no point in me giving you a list. But the Shaykh is saying here, a lot of these have been translated in English as well. And they're cheap. And then he says, then build and continue building, and then purchase books from Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. And then the last piece of advice, now this is also very important. Now, this applies to books, it applies to social media, it applies to any kind of input of knowledge that you have. The Shaykh says here, Al-Kutub tanqasim ila thalathati aqsam. Books are split into three types. Kutub khair. Kutub shar. Now look at this, number 3. Kutub la khair wa la shar. And I would argue most of the information that comes your way in the life that we're living in this time of fitna is in second or third category. Kutub khair, good books. Kutub shar, bad books, second category. Third category, neither good, neither bad. Just useless, pointless information. Documentaries, podcasts, wallahi, the list goes on. What's the benefit? You sat there for 2 hours. What did I get? It's like, wallahi, somebody was listening to a podcast. The importance of sleeping. 3 hours podcast, something like that. Sleeping is important, but 3 hours, what is that, man? 3 minutes, akhi. Just give me the... Allah musta'an. But the thing is, the views, 10 million views or something like that. This is the issue now. This is the issue. So the Shaykh is saying this 30 years ago, this applies to ilm, this applies to you when it comes to any kind of input. And then the last thing the Shaykh says, now this is also very important, this is the point that I was making before, لأن الكتب غذاء للروح كالطعام والشراب للبدن. Books for your soul is food, just like food and drink is nourishment for your body. So if you are going to eat something which is good, it's going to have a good impact on your soul. If you're going to eat something which is bad, you're going to feel it in your soul. And if you've eaten something which is not good or not bad, then there's nothing. لا يسمن ولا يغني من جوع. It doesn't bring nourishment and it doesn't quench your hunger. What have you eaten? It's nothing. Right, the Shaykh now gives us a list. Now this is very important. So the Shaykh says here, you need to have these books according to this order. He begins with Aqeedah. Number 1, Thalathatul Usul. Number 2, Al-Qawaid Al-Arba. Now this is the order that he's given. Now here, I just want to point out something. This is obviously according to Ijtihad of the Shaykh. But you will find that the books that he mentions here, wallahi, I don't think there's anything that you need outside of this. However, obviously, even from the time the ulama from before, they will say, for example, okay, start with Umdatul Fiqh, then go on to Zad al-Mustaqni', then maybe go on to Kafi, then maybe go on to Mughni. The syllabus that they will draw for their students, especially when it comes to time and location and generation, etc., might differ in their advice to yours. However, what he is saying here, I think, is really good. Why? Because I don't think there's anything much that you will need outside of what he has given, number one. Number two, the advice that he gives here is tried and tested. And number three, I think especially with the smaller books, it's translated in English. So this is a very beneficial list that the Shaykh gives. I know it's Qawaid al-Arba was number two, but Qawaid al-Arba, ثلاثة الأصول, كشف الشبهات, كتاب التوحيد. Number 5, العقيدة الواسطية. Number 6, العقيدة الحموية. Number 7, التدمرية. 8, الطحاوية. Because of time, I'm just going to read it through. You can listen to it back if you have to, because I know Ustadh's going to come now. And then number 10, الدرر السنية في الأجوبة النجدية. We don't have that in English. But this is like a volume on question and answers in Masail when it comes to Aqidah. So I think even if you stop at Tahawiyya with a good explanation, I think that's a very good Aqidah section. Right. Hadith, start off with Nawawi's 40. And the Shaykh says here, this book is طيب لأن فيه آداب ومنهج جيدا وقواعد مفيدا جدا. He goes, it's got so many principles, to the point that some of the ulama have said that these 40 explain the whole religion, as in principles in the whole religion. Umdat al-Ahkam, Bulugh al-Maram. And if you can get the explanation, Bulugh al-Maram, even better. Subul al-Salam is probably the best one, San'ani. After that, you're now on a level to get the rest of the 6. Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. Where are we? Fiqh. Adab al-Mashi ila-Salah. Again, this is from the Ijtihad of the Shaykh. Adab al-Mashi ila-Salah is a book on fiqh, simple fiqh, by Shaykh Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, where he just talks about the ibadat, basic ibadat, do this, don't do that. Then Zad al-Mustaqni', again, Hanbali. And then its explanation, Rawd al-Murbi'. And then Umdat al-Fiqh. Tafsir, start with Sa'di, then Ibn Kathir. This is the list that the Shaykh has given. If the person is able, then he talks about Nahu and Sarf, but I've got a whole different take on that anyway. But he talks about Ajrumiyya and then Ibn Malik, Alfiya ibn Malik. But perhaps we'll talk about that on another occasion. Now, before we finish, when he talks about the books of fiqh and the books of hadith and the books of tafsir, he also says that it's very important for you to learn the principles within them. So when it comes to hadith, Nukhbatul Fiqh is very important. When it comes to fiqh, Usul al-Fiqh is very important. So Usul min ilm al-Usul, which is from the Shaykh himself, which inshallah, hopefully we'll be going through soon. And then when it comes to tafsir, you have to study tafsir with its principles. And again, hopefully we'll talk about that at some point when we go through this book, because a lot of people are going through hadith, going through fiqh, going through tafsir. Tafsir is one of those topics that a lot of people just start talking about tafsir, or start listening to tafsir and going onto, social media and YouTube, etc., and just start listening to tafsir. And the person who's listening to tafsir thinks he's listening to tafsir without any usul. How can you do that? How can you become a doctor without studying medicine, without knowing the principles behind that? So the Shaykh is saying here, Muqaddimah by Shaykh al-Islam fi tafsir is very important, because this gives you the usul in tafsir before you study the tafsir. So this is what the Shaykh had to say when it comes to having a book list. And then he gave us important books also to have when it comes to akhlaq and adab, such as Rawdatul Uqala and also Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. And this is inshallah where we'll stop. Like I said, now we've got a whole section here. This here, all of this is question and answers. And I do respect and understand and appreciate that question and answers isn't always, the best way to seek ilm. Seeking ilm is through studying, etc. But there are a lot of beneficial questions here and answers. And it's been part of the book because of that reason. So what we'll do is we'll try and summarize. I think the English version has already summarized them, but I'm just going to go through the ones that we need because of the things that we've already discussed in the class or not. And inshallah we'll be doing that next week and the week after. And then, like I said, we've got those recital that we can go through before the end of the month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of the people of ilm, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us those who are firm upon it, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us of the people of righteous actions, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it as a proof for us and not against us, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, and He takes us in a manner that He is pleased with. That wallahu a'lam, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.